Hi everyone, the Mature Simmer here. So, finished up seeding. Basically used about $16,000 worth of supplies. Really close to the same amount of seeds as fertilizer. Did not have to fill up the planter for either supply. So that is one of the other benefits of soybeans, is that it doesn't consume a lot of material. And again, you don't get massive yield per se, but you you get a good return, I think. So did feel, when I took a look at the length, I think we had, well over 20 minutes of information or just video that I had been chatting on and so forth with the planting. So just kind of left that as its own thing. But obviously same day here. So we have not changed on the day. I was going to say the crop is what was running through my head, and that's why my mouth wasn't working, because it was like, well, that's not right, because it isn't. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and roll. Looks like I missed a bit there, but I think when I come back, I'll maybe clean that up or something. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and roll. So you can see here on the map, it just updated now for the planning. I mean, we've got a good amount of rocks, but I can't say that I have more than I've had before. So kind of going to one of the discussions I was having in the last episode is, at some point, does it just keep adding more and more rocks if all we're doing is rolling them under? And maybe it is increasing. I mean, I don't know that there's a way other than literally doing some kind of painstaking scientific thing. Like, I know, trying to remember what kind of experiment. It's not coming to me, but where people basically looked and then sat and counted every appearance of something, and it might have been stars or something on some image of the sky to see if they were increasing in from one decade to another or something, and was some painstaking count of tens of thousands or something. I'm like, I don't even know how you keep track of what you've counted and what you haven't with something like that. But anyway, so it's something similar. I mean, we certainly don't have tens of thousands of yellow spots on that map, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was over 100. And so sitting there and then trying to make sure that you didn't double count a dot and so forth. And I think it's just, do I start getting a covered field? Because obviously there's still spaces, and certainly on the southern end it was a lot more pronounced. I'm not sure where I was planted here. I'm not sure it was there, but I'm going to roll this because it is changing color, I think, so it's possible that was where I planted some soybeans. I don't know. But we'll go ahead here. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the planter, but now I know is that, I just can't go into the water. Now this does have obviously a shorter distance behind the tractor than the planter did, but in any event, I'm just going to run a path here. I do have to remember to plow that one corner of that field that we're approaching, field 13, to plow under the soybeans that I mistakenly planted when I forgot to turn the planter off. I didn't have any other oops-a-daisies anywhere else that I recall when I was planting. And I mean, again, I really have gone from one activity to the other. I just, rather than making it a over half-hour episode for the sake of just getting the same day into the into the video, I've just decided, no, I'm gonna separate them out. Yeah, but it's just a slight texture difference on the rolling. And if for some reason you've come across this video and haven't seen the previous one, I've also learned, and so that's some of the activity I'll be doing, is that spraying herbicide before the weeds emerge actually increases our yield by 15%, is what someone said. So, or actually, removes a yield hit that occurs that basically decreases the yield by 15%. So, want to take advantage of that. So after I roll, I will then be turning around and spraying herbicide at least. And I am going to take a quick experiment, whether I do the work or not today, or not, if it works, will be debated, or will be determined when I get there. I guess it won't really be debated unless I start talking to myself a lot. But I'm curious, because we did determine the one day that I could spray herbicide and then I could spray fertilizer immediately after. Now, because in FS22 it actually tracks them on the map, and so that appeared to then have given it the ability to do that, where in FS19, when you did two, I guess, wet jobs, if you want to call it that. So there's some rocks. Let's just, watch them disappear. Wonderful. That's obviously why we're doing this. It's more to get the rocks out of the way and not damage equipment than it is for the 3 or 4% improvement in crop yield. Alright, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and kind of get online here to where I would be. That will cover up the blemish I have at the end, where I made a little bit of a mistake, but it will, I don't know that it was a mistake, I just missed a portion of the field in how things were working, but it'll cover that up and it'll make it a little bit smoother. But yeah, what I was going to be determining then is, whoops, hitting all the wrong buttons. I want to do what I'm doing so that it's not mistakenly rolling the other field, is what I'm trying to do here. But in FS19, as I said, like 2 wet jobs, meaning spraying and then spraying. So if you use the sprayer twice in the same day where the field state did not change, it didn't work. So I kind of have several instances where I was spraying weeds, and obviously the weeds that had sprouted were turning gray as soon as the sprayer went over them, so it looked from a visual standpoint with the weeds themselves as if it was working, but then suddenly the next day weeds would be back, and I'd be like, well, wait a minute. And this was like I'd never worked with weeds until I started playing FSN. And again, I started playing FSN pretty quickly after I got into Farming Simulator. I just got lucky enough to have come across the community and then, went through the process and gotten accepted pretty quickly. So it was just a matter of a couple months. And so I had not progressed in single player to the point where I had turned on weeds. And I mean, truth be told, I tend to play a lot of my single player with weeds off because it's just not a job I'm terribly fond of. Well, this isn't going to do what I thought, but oh well. So I'm going to have a piece here where I'm going to have to run that little sliver off to the left. I'm going to have to come back and touch that up because I was obviously running with the field and not on the line earlier, so I still have some cleanup on this side, but oh well. I mean, it's a roller, it's not using supplies other than gas, so it's not the end of the world. But I went into FSN and was using the weeds, and that was kind of my first experience, because initially, you know, just as we saw here in Shellbrook, you know, obviously I wasn't recording my early days of Misty Hills, my first days in FSN. Didn't really start doing that till I had been in the community for about half a year, and, you know, gotten pretty well versed and so forth, and that was the time that coincided with me starting up the channel in earnest and saying, hey, I'm gonna, you know, contribute to the sim community, specifically Farming Simulator, where most of my content is, because that's where I spend most of my time. But so I had gone in, and that first year, when you take over and, you know, you're plowing all the fields, you're doing everything, you know, as we've seen here, when you're plowing, you're not seeing weeds at that point. And so it took a few years. Then suddenly they came up. Then the other debate that was happening in FS19, especially on FSN, is like, is it even worth worrying about the weeds? Because the impact is so minimal in FS19. It's not significant enough, and a lot of people would just ignore weeds and just let them grow on their fields. And I did that for a while, and then it kind of became, and I think it was more with the precision farming switch over, where there definitely was something, and obviously, you know, the seasons that we did have had something, but at some point, whatever the reason, I don't remember specifically, I decided I'm going to start treating weeds. And so when I did that, the first season or two, I just kept fighting with, like, when do I spray? Because I would spray, and then they come back, and, you know, at a minimum, I was almost having a situation where I was doing it multiple times a year, and at least twice. It was basically, I think, like after harvest and after planting, and then ultimately what I finally found out was, okay, if you do it after planting, it will stay away through harvest, and then basically, instead of worrying about spraying the field, like, they would appear after harvest again, because the way FS19, and I think it was with seasons, worked is sorry, I'm just trying to make sure things are, you know, you're playing with that button to move around quickly with the roller, because you can't lift it. So my only option to move around fast is to just kind of be in the process of folding and unfolding, and I had been hitting the X key so many times I didn't know if I was coming or going, if I was folding or unfolding, so I had to stop and focus on that for a second. But you know, so they'd be, quote unquote, you know, the verbiage or the talk in the community was, weeds are planted by both your seeder and by your harvester. So, you know, I knew they were planted twice, but looking at it, it was like, well, it's the impact to my yield, and I've got no yield happening after harvest and between plantings, so killing off weeds during that period is just a waste of herbicide, because they'll be planted again by the seeder when I go ahead and plant. So, you know, I ultimately got there, but in the process, just because of timing and stuff, I was just like, well, spraying goes really fast, and the fields weren't this large in Seneca, so I'd be like, well, I'll just spray, you know, I'll do my fertilizer spraying, and then I'll do my herbicide spraying, and then the weeds kept coming back, and so I did that for a year, maybe 2, as I was experimenting. And because I think what I started trying to figure out is, do I just do it later? But I quickly came upon the fact, like, I couldn't see a state change in the field, and so I'm like, and the other problem we had is in FS 19, you couldn't tell that you had sprayed weeds, like on the map. There wasn't an indicator that had happened other than weeds being gone, and so there was that whole challenge as well. And so with FS22, they've changed the dynamic, and I think in making it appear on the map, it may have made it possible to go ahead and actually do those in the same day, do 2 wet jobs in a row, and not have it not count. So what that could turn into, and certainly time is going to be an indicator on that, where if I have a day where I can do, in essence, what amount to 4 jobs, then hey, I can maybe do that. And the benefit that it brings, I'm not real thrilled with what I'm seeing, so I'm gonna let it keep folding, sadly. And so I'm trying not to touch this other field, which really is pointless, because in the end, if I do, it's not like it's going to hurt anything. Obviously I roll it up there at one point when I was turning around. It's just, this cycle, I'm kind of deciding to do this east-west run on the north, on this end of the field, the north end of this segment, and so it's causing me to touch that field more often, where normally I'd just run the 2 headlands, so I'd go out and back, and I'd have that one little turn, which I think is where I had caught it up there, and then I'd start going up and down. But then over at this end, I either am switching back to east-west, or just have really short north-south runs. So it was the decision I made when I was planting that, hey, I'm gonna do it this way, and I'm just kind of sticking with that. But in this case, if I can do that, and if I just choose, like, hey, I haven't overdosed on Farming Simulator in one day yet, or whatever it is, I could plant, roll, spray for herbicide, and do my second coat of fertilizer in the same day. Now, the other thing that will come into play here is I did fertilize today. Now, it was solid fert, and typically even in FS19, like, you could do solid fert for one application and then do liquid fert for another on the same day, and it would work because one was dry, one was wet. So the field state would be different. Now, when I say stage, because in FS19 with seasons, there was a difference in that you had to fertilize your crops 3 times, as opposed to FS22, the way it's built, theoretically, I guess we'd say, with seasons, because seasons is built in to the base game at this point. You only have to fertilize twice. So they didn't maintain what Realismus modding had done with seasons in FS19, which was create 3 stages. Because I think in base game, without seasons, it was already 2, and so their point was, well, seasons is adding more realism, and I don't know, maybe farmers do fertilize 3 times. I don't think they do. Again, I mentioned even in the last episode, I enjoy watching Millennial Farmer. I never see him out there applying fertilizer multiple times a season. So, I don't think it's something that happens in real farming, or at least he doesn't do it, I guess, is all I could say, because obviously one of the things I know um, you know, added information to my logic is, I did watch a video from a YouTuber. I don't recall the name at this point. I think it might be Former Pickle or something. It might have been his. That basically said, like, what's the draw of, why does Farming Simulator stick or pull people in or whatever? And one of his points was that he really felt, even with all the variation of farming styles across the globe, that you could do whatever type of farming you're familiar with in your space in Farming Simulator. So it was just a versatile enough game that it didn't demand you follow these steps only, and that even though it's written by a company in Europe and Germany, that it was like, well, this is how we farm in Germany and this is what you need to do. Like they built it in a way that, regardless of whether it's the US, that, Australia, other places, and I don't know if all these different places have different styles of farming. I know for certain Europe and the US vary, but beyond that, it may not, but I would imagine it does to some degree. And it was like, you can do that in the game, and so that's definitely one of the cool things with it, and kind of why this experimentation is able to happen, and kind of what makes it a bit intriguing, because we're now, again, 10, 15 years getting on into being here on Shellbrook, and I'm sitting here talking about yet another way to try this, because you're getting, at the pace I'm going, one iteration each time, and then obviously time goes by, and so this is the 10th or whatever time that I'm working on fields on my farm, and so I can try something a bit different. So that's kind of what's what's new, what I can tell you since I started a few hours ago this morning. But I'll save anything else for when I'm back here with my sprayer. And I think in that case, if I do those two, those two I might combine into an episode. But we'll see. Because splitting them up, obviously, kind of popping FS content onto the channel every couple days. I need episodes too. So sometimes having real quick, short episodes isn't a bad thing either. So who knows? Guess we'll just see how the mood strikes me. But and as I said, the other thing that can derail anything like that is I may just decide I'm not doing that fourth job today, because that will have me on the fields for 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever it is in aggregate. So because I am starting to feel a little bit of that restlessness of like, I've been doing this for a long time, because usually it's one job at a time. But I guess the wrap up to this, because that's really the whole point of me going through this, is if I'm able to do that, I create the situation at that point where I literally don't do anything on this field then until harvest, because I've finished everything in one day. So if I'm able to do that, it does create that dynamic where I've got 4 or 5 days then that I don't have to focus on anything here other than, anything to do with the pigs, obviously. Because, again, as I talked about in the last episode, slurry's full. They're getting close. They were down to just under 5,000 liters of food left. So, with 5,000 liters, they probably still have a couple days that they could go, at least one, today for sure. Because I'm constantly coming back and they're out of food. And it's because of things like that where I'll do all this work and then, in my head, I'm like, well, I can kind of ignore my FSN farm for 4 days, and then I've got to come back in 4 days. I just haven't gotten pigs into my head, and I don't know that I ever will, because feeding them takes all of 10 minutes. So I'll probably top off the food too whenever I do that, but that may be one of those too where I'm just like, I'm going to do slurry and feeding, and that's what I'll do tomorrow or something, because I do have to be on here tomorrow to sell pigs. So tomorrow may just become pig day, for whatever that turns into, 30 minutes, an hour, and that'll be the work I need to do if I can get everything done here. So there's a little bit of that in me, like, hey, that would be cool. Like if I could just be done with the crop work and just have it all hammered out at once. Gives me a sense of accomplishment, and then lets me focus on other series and other things that I'm working on for the channel, and just life in general. I'm not beholden to my FSN farm day in and day out. So that's enough for now. I will finish rolling, and whoops. Yeah, I will stop doing what I'm doing and being goofy. My goodness, I can't figure out the problem is. Oh, now I went too far. So, anyway, I don't know. I'm trying to not roll this field. I don't know why. Obviously, I've done it before, so I'll just roll. I'll roll with it. Alright, so I'm getting kind of stupid. So I will see you next time.